Commander Zethara pressed her long fingers against the communication panel as another explosion shook the command center. Through the crystal windows of the defense tower, she could see her beautiful world dying. The great spires of Veltar Prime that had stood for 10,000 years were melting under streams of acid that fell like rain from the sky. The Vorthak had been attacking for 6 days now, and nothing could stop them. The Kaleri had always been a peaceful people. Their world was a paradise of floating cities and crystal gardens. They had joined the galactic community 300 years ago and had never fought a real war. Why would they need to when the galaxy was full of civilized species who solved problems with words and treaties? But the Vorthak were not civilized. They were something else entirely. Zethara watched as another of her people's beautiful cities collapsed into ruin. The Vorthak swarmed over everything like a living carpet of destruction. They ate metal and stone and turned it into more of themselves. They poisoned the air and water with their toxic breath. They took prisoners only to use them as breeding hosts for their young. Her people were dying and she could do nothing to save them. The defense fleet had tried to fight. 27 beautiful ships had risen to meet the Vorthak swarm in space. Only 3 had returned, and they were so damaged they could barely fly. The Vorthak ships were not ships at all, but living creatures the size of mountains. They healed from any damage and grew stronger with each battle. Energy weapons barely scratched them. Missiles were eaten by smaller creatures that surrounded the bioships like a cloud of living metal. Her aide, Velros, stumbled into the command center with blood running down his face. Commander, the Eastern District has fallen. The evacuation. Tunnels are blocked. We have maybe 2 hours before they reach the government complex. Zethara felt her heart sink. The government complex was supposed to be the safest place on the planet. If the Vorthak reached it, then truly all was lost. She looked at the communication panel again. The long-range transmitter was still working somehow. There was still one chance left. "Open all channels," she ordered. "Send the distress signal to every species in the galaxy. Tell them we need help. Tell them we are dying." Velros began typing the message with shaking hands. The signal would reach across the stars to every member of the galactic community. Surely someone would help. The Altarians had technology that could stop anything. The Draconis Empire had the strongest military in known space. The Council of Ethereal Minds had wisdom that stretched back millions of years. Someone would come. The message went out across the galaxy like a cry for help echoing through the darkness. It reached the Altarian homeworld first, where their High Council was meeting in their Tower of Light. They read the message and felt deep sadness for the Kaleri. But the Altarians had fought the Vorthak before 500 years ago. They had barely survived that encounter and had sworn never to face such monsters again. They sent their regrets and a promise to remember the Kaleri in their songs. The Draconis Empire received the signal next. General Thrax read the report with his warrior's eyes and felt his blood run hot with the desire for battle. But even his pride was not stronger than his wisdom. The Draconis had also faced the Vorthak long ago. An entire battle fleet had been consumed. Every warrior aboard used as breeding stock for new horrors. The Empire sent supplies and weapons, but would not risk their ships or their people, one by one. The responses came back to Veltar Prime. The Council of Ethereal Minds spoke of the greater balance and the need to preserve themselves for future wisdom. The Trade Federation calculated the cost and found it too high. The Scientific Union offered to study the Vorthak after they were done consuming the planet. Each message was the same. Sympathy without action. Regret without help, Zethara read. Each response and felt hope die a little more. How could this be? How could all these great civilizations simply watch while her people were destroyed? Were they all cowards? Or did they know something about the Vorthak that made even the bravest species turn away, far from the galactic core? In a region that most civilized species considered primitive frontier space, the signal reached a small monitoring station orbiting a blue and green world called Earth. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was finishing his night shift when the message came through the long-range receivers. He had been monitoring space communications for 3 years and had heard distress signals before, but never anything like this. The message from the Kaleri painted a picture of horror that made Jake's blood run cold. An entire species facing extinction, cities melting under alien acid, millions of people trapped underground with their air running out. And according to the attached data, no one was coming to help. Jake printed the message and ran through the corridors of the space station to find his commander. Captain Lisa Hernandez was in her office reviewing supply reports when Jake burst through the door. She read the message twice before she believed what she was seeing. "This came in 20 minutes ago," Jake said. "I checked the galactic communication logs. Every major species has responded, but they're all saying no. Nobody's going to help these people." Lisa studied the data about the Vorthek. They sounded like something out of a nightmare. Living ships that ate metal, creatures that poisoned worlds, a hive mind that turned entire planets into breeding grounds. She could understand why other species might be afraid to fight such things. But understanding did not mean accepting. "Get me Admiral Connor Blake on priority communication," she ordered. "And wake up everyone in the analysis department. We need to know everything about this situation in the next hour." Jake hesitated. "Captain, we're just a monitoring station. We don't have any combat ships or troops. What can we possibly do that the galactic powers can't?" Lisa looked at him with steady eyes. "Maybe nothing. But we're going to try anyway, because that's what humans do." The message went up the chain of command faster than any communication in Earth's short galactic history. Within 6 hours, Admiral Blake had authorized the deployment of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. 12 ships and 15,000 troops were being prepared for immediate departure to a world most of them had never heard of to fight creatures that had scared away the rest of the galaxy. The Kaleri had no idea that help was coming from the primitive world called Earth. They continued to broadcast their signal even as the Vorthak closed in around them. In her final transmission before the communication center was overrun, Zathara spoke to the empty stars with words that would later be carved in stone on a dozen human worlds. "We called for help and you turned away. We asked for mercy and you gave us silence. Remember us when the darkness comes for you." She did not know that in the depths of space, human ships were already moving toward her world with the fury of a species that had never learned to quit. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veltar system like a hammer blow against reality itself. Space twisted and screamed as 12 ships forced their way back into normal physics with more violence than grace. The gravitational waves from their arrival rippled across the system and set off alarms on every Vorthak bioship within 100 million kilometers. Captain Alex Stone stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant and watched the tactical display paint. A picture of hell? The Vorthak swarm had spread across 3 planets like a cancer. Veltar Prime was almost completely covered in a writhing mass of organic matter that pulsed with its own sick light. The other 2 worlds in the system showed similar infections, though not as advanced. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Commander Maya Rodriguez from the tactical station. She had seen combat footage from a dozen worlds, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Vorthak bioships moved through space like living mountains, their surfaces crawling with smaller creatures that served as fighters and scouts. Each ship was unique, grown rather than built, shaped by alien intelligence into forms that hurt to look at. "How many ships are we looking at?" Captain Stone asked. Maya ran the numbers through the computer 3 times before she trusted them. "At least 400 bioships of various sizes, sir. The largest ones are bigger than our dreadnoughts. And sir, there are thousands of smaller craft, maybe tens of thousands." Stone nodded as if she had told him the weather forecast. He had read the reports about what happened to other species who fought the Vorthak. The Altarians had lost 3 fleets before they gave up. The Draconis Empire had seen an entire battle group consumed and turned into breeding stock. But Captain Alex Stone had also read the history of his own species, and humans had a long tradition of fighting impossible odds. "Open a channel to all ships," he ordered. "All hands, this is Captain Stone. We are here to save the people of Veltar Prime from extinction. The enemy has numbers and size on their side. We have something better. We have human stubbornness. And the best damn crews in the galaxy. Make your shots count and watch each other's backs. Stone out. The communication officer tried to raise the Kaleri defense forces on all frequencies. For 10 minutes there was only static. Then a weak signal came through from somewhere deep, underground on Veltar Prime. The voice that spoke was tired and full of despair. Unknown vessels, this is Commander Zathara of the Kaleri Defense Command. Please identify yourselves. Commander, this is Captain Alex Stone of the Earthship Defiant. We received your distress signal. We're here to help. There was a long pause. When Zathara spoke again, her voice was filled with disbelief. Earth, I do not know this world. You are not one of the great powers. Why would you come when they would not? Because someone had to, Stone replied simply. Can you give us tactical information about the enemy positions? Zathara transmitted everything she had. The data showed that the Vortheg had been systematically destroying every city and military installation on the planet. Millions of Kaleri were trapped in underground shelters with their air supplies running low. The surface was completely overrun with Vorthok, biomatter that poisoned everything it touched. Maya studied the enemy formations and shook her head. Sir, they have us outnumbered 40-1. And according to this data, their bioships can heal damage and adapt to our weapons. How are we supposed to fight something like that? Captain Stone looked at the display showing the dying world below them. Somewhere down there, people were suffocating in dark tunnels while monsters destroyed everything they had ever built. The smart thing would be to retreat and call for reinforcements. The safe thing would be to follow the example of the other galactic powers and declare the situation hopeless. The same way humans have always fought impossible odds, he said. We get creative, we get mean, and we refuse to give up. Launch all fighters and prepare for assault. The human fighters screamed out of their launch bays like angry wasps. They were not the sleek, elegant craft favored by other species. Human fighters were ugly, angular things built for one purpose: killing the enemy at close range. Pilot Jake Carson led the first squadron toward the nearest Vorthek bioship, his fighter loaded with kinetic rounds and high-explosive missiles. The Vorthak response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of smaller biocraft swarmed up from the planet's surface like a cloud of living death. They moved with perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly what every other was doing. The human pilots had never seen anything like it. Holy hell, Carson muttered as he watched the enemy swarm approach. There's too many of them to count. But human pilots had something the Vorthak did not expect: unpredictability. While other species relied on formation flying and coordinated tactics, humans fought like the guerrilla warriors they had always been. Each pilot chose his own targets and attacked in his own way. The result was chaos that the Vorthak hive mind could not predict or counter. Carson rolled his fighter through a loop that should have been impossible at his speed, and came up behind a biocraft twice the size of his ship. His kinetic rounds tore through its organic armor like paper. The creature screamed as it died, a sound that came through space itself rather than radio waves. On the Defiance bridge, Maya watched the fighter battle with growing amazement. Sir, they're actually winning. The enemy craft are faster and more maneuverable, but our pilots are flying like madmen. The Vorthak can't predict what they're going to do next. Captain Stone smiled grimly. That's because they think there are rules to follow. Humans never learned the rules. The battle raged for 2 hours. Human fighters darted through the Vorthak swarm like sharks among minnows, striking hard and fast before disappearing into the darkness of space. The enemy's perfect coordination became a weakness as they tried to respond to attacks that made no tactical sense, but the real shock came when the human capital ships entered the battle. Instead of standing off at long range like civilized species, the USS Defiant and her sister ships charged straight into the enemy formation. Their weapons were crude by galactic standards: kinetic rounds, nuclear missiles, and chemical explosives. But they were devastating against an enemy that had evolved to fight. Energy weapons. Commander Zathara, watched the battle from her underground bunker and could not believe what she was seeing. The humans fought like beings possessed. Their ships took damage that would have sent other species retreating, but they kept coming. When the USS Vengeance lost its main engines, it used maneuvering thrusters to ram a Vorthek bioship twice its size. "What manner of beings are these?" she whispered to her aide Velros. Velros was studying the tactical data with amazement. The Galactic database lists them as a Class 12 Deathworld species. Their planet is classified as barely habitable due to extreme weather, dangerous predators, and toxic environments. Zathara understood then. These humans came from a world that was trying to kill them every day. Fighting impossible odds was not courage for them. It was simply life as they had always known it. The tide of battle began to turn as more Vorthek bioships arrived from the outer system. The humans were fighting magnificently, but they were still vastly outnumbered. Captain Stone knew they needed to get ground forces onto the planet's surface before the fleet was overwhelmed. "All Marine units, prepare for combat drop," he ordered. "We're going in hot." Sergeant Ryan Clark strapped himself into his drop pod and checked his weapons one final time. He had fought on 6 different worlds in his 10-year career, but never against anything like this. The mission briefing had made it clear: get to the surface, link up with Kaleri survivors, and hold until the fleet could clear the orbital space. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot announced. Ryan looked at his squad of 12 Marines and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. They were scared, but they were ready. Fear was just another enemy to overcome. The drop pods launched toward the planet's surface like bullets fired from the gods themselves. As they fell through the poisoned atmosphere of Veltar Prime, Ryan could see the true scope of the Vorthek infestation below. The entire surface crawled with organic matter that pulsed and writhed like a living thing. Acid rain fell from clouds made of alien spores. "This is going to be interesting," he muttered, as his pod prepared for impact. The drop pods slammed into the surface of Veltar Prime like meteors carrying death from above. Each impact sent shockwaves through the organic matter that covered the planet, and the Vorthak responded immediately. Creatures the size of buildings erupted from the living carpet and rushed toward the landing sites with hunger that could be felt in the air itself. Sergeant Ryan Clark kicked open his pod door and stepped into hell. The air burned his lungs even through his environmental suit. The ground beneath his feet was not soil, but something that moved and breathed like diseased flesh. Acid rain fell from the sky in sheets that would have dissolved an unprotected human in minutes, but Ryan Clark was not unprotected, and he was definitely not helpless. He raised his assault rifle and put 3 rounds into the center mass of a Vorthak drone that was charging toward him. The creature was 8 feet tall with arms that ended in bone blades and a mouth full of teeth like broken glass. The kinetic rounds punched through its armor and sent it tumbling backward into the organic muck. "Squad Alpha, sound off," he barked into his comm system. "Rodriguez here, landed safe. Turner's down but breathing." Johnson's pod got eaten by something. No response. Ryan counted his people as they emerged from their pods. 9 Marines out of 12 had made it to the surface alive. Not great odds, but humans had worked with worse. The first wave of Vorthek attackers came at them like a living avalanche. Dozens of creatures emerged from the ground itself, their bodies adapted for different kinds of killing. Some moved on 4 legs like giant spiders. Others slithered like snakes with human faces. All of them wanted to tear the invaders apart and use their bodies to breed more horror. Staff Sergeant Nicole Foster had landed 2 kilometers away with her own squad. Her mission was to reach the Kaleri shelter complex that was marked on their tactical maps. According to the briefings, 3,000 civilians were trapped underground with maybe 6 hours of air left. Nicole's first sight of the shelter entrance made her stomach turn. The Vorthak had covered it with a web of organic material that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Smaller creatures moved through the web like spiders, and she could hear them trying to dig through the metal doors below. "Martinez, break out the flamethrowers," she ordered. "We're going to cook these bastards." Corporal Danny Wright had seen combat on 4 different worlds, but nothing had prepared him for what he found in the ruins of a Kaleri city, the Beautiful. Crystal spires had been partially dissolved by Vorthak acid, leaving twisted sculptures that hurt to look at. Organic matter covered everything like a skin, and things moved inside it that were better left unseen. His mission was simple, clear. A path to the government complex where Commander Zethara was supposedly still alive. The complex was only 2 miles away, but those 2 miles were crawling with more hostiles than he had ever seen in one place. Danny checked his weapons. Loadout: assault rifle with armor-piercing rounds, 4 grenades, a combat knife, and enough thermite to melt through a tank. It was not much against an entire planet full of monsters, but it would have to be enough. The first Vorthak creature he encountered was the size of a small building and looked like someone's nightmare of a praying mantis. It reared up on its hind legs and let out a shriek that shattered the crystal windows of nearby buildings. Danny responded by pulling the pin on a thermite grenade and throwing it directly at the creature's head. The explosion lit up the street like a miniature sun. When the smoke cleared, the creature was still standing, but half its head was missing and green fluid was pouring from the wound. It staggered toward Danny with less coordination than before. "Okay," Danny muttered, "so you can take some damage." He emptied a full magazine into the creature's center mass, rolled behind a chunk of fallen building material, and reloaded. The creature crashed to the ground and stopped moving. Danny had learned something important. The Vorthak could be killed. But they took a lot of killing. Back at the shelter complex, Nicole and her squad were making progress. The flamethrowers had cleared most of the organic webbing from the entrance, and her explosives expert was working on the sealed doors. The Kaleri inside had heard the fighting and were responding on emergency frequencies. "Human soldiers can—" "You hear us?" came a weak voice through the comm system. "We have injured people in here. Our air will not last much longer." "We hear you," Nicole replied. "Keep your people away from the main entrance. We're coming in hot." The explosive charges blew the doors clean off their hinges. Nicole and her Marines rushed into the shelter complex with weapons ready, expecting to find Vorthak creatures inside. Instead, they found 3,000 Kaleri civilians huddled in the darkness, their large eyes reflecting the light from human helmet lamps. The Kaleri were beautiful people, tall and slender with skin that shimmered like pearl. But beauty meant nothing when you were suffocating in the dark. Nicole could see that many of them were already showing signs of oxygen deprivation. "We need to get these people to the surface," she told her squad. "The air up there is toxic, but we've got filter masks for maybe 100 of them." "What about the other 2,900? asked Private First Class Kevin Martinez. Nicole looked at the faces around her, all of them trusting her to find a miracle. "We're going to have to clear the Vorthak from this entire sector and set up a defensive perimeter. Then we call for evacuation shuttles." It was an impossible task for a squad of 12 Marines. The Vorthak controlled everything for miles around. But Nicole had not become a staff sergeant by accepting the impossible. Meanwhile, Captain Alex Stone was fighting his own battle in space above the planet. The human fleet had managed to clear a corridor through the Vorthak bioships, but more enemies kept arriving from the outer system. The USS Defiant had taken heavy damage, with hull breaches on 3 decks and main power down to 60%. "Sir?" "We're getting reports from the ground teams," reported Maya Rodriguez. "They've made contact with civilian survivors, but they're heavily outnumbered. They need close air support." Stone looked at the tactical display. Half his fighters were either destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting. The remaining ships of his fleet were scattered across the system, each one fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. "Tell Captain Elena Vasquez to take her squadron down into the atmosphere," he ordered. "I want every Vorthak position within 10 miles of our people turned into smoking craters." Captain Vasquez received the order while her fighter was locked in a dogfight with 3 Vorthak biocraft. She had been a pilot for 8 years and had never lost a wingman in combat. Today she had already lost 2, and the day was far from over. "Blue Squadron, form up on me," she transmitted. "We're going downstairs to help the ground pounders." The atmospheric entry was like flying through acid soup. The Vorthak had poisoned the air itself with their presence. Vasquez's fighter shook and rattled as she dove through the toxic clouds, her instruments screaming warnings about corrosive damage to the hull. When she broke through the cloud layer, she saw the true scope of the infestation below. The entire planet looked like it was diseased. Organic matter covered everything, pulsing and writhing like the surface of some enormous beast. Streams of acid flowed where rivers should have been. Structures that might once have been beautiful cities were now twisted nightmares of melted metal and corrupted flesh. "Jesus," whispered her wingman, Lieutenant Troy Johnson. "How are we supposed to tell the good guys from the bad guys down there?" "Look for the explosions," Vasquez replied. "Where there are humans, there are always explosions." She was right. Danny Wright had reached the government complex and was making his presence known with liberal use of high explosives. Every few minutes, another section of the building would light up as he cleared it room by room. Vasquez lined up her first attack run on a concentration of Vorthak, creatures that were trying to surround the complex. Her fighter carried cluster bombs designed for use against infantry formations. The aliens below had no idea what was about to hit them. The bombs scattered across a 6-block area and detonated simultaneously. The explosion was visible from orbit and sent a mushroom cloud of vaporized organic matter high into the atmosphere. When the smoke cleared, there was a crater where the Vorthak formation had been. "Direct hit," Johnson reported. "That got their attention." Indeed it had. Vorthak biocraft began rising from the surface like angry wasps. They were smaller than the ones fighting in space, but there were hundreds of them. Vasquez found herself in the middle of a swirling dogfight with enemies that moved like living things and attacked with weapons that grew from their own bodies. Down on the surface, Danny Wright kicked in the door to the command center and found Commander Zathara huddled over a communication console with 3 other Kaleri officers. They looked up at him with expressions of amazement and terror. "Ma'am, I'm Corporal Danny Wright, Earth Marines," he said. "We're here to get you out." Zathara stared at the human warrior standing in her command center. He was covered in green fluid that she recognized as Vorthak blood. His armor was scarred and dented from close combat. His weapon was a crude kinetic device that would have been considered primitive by galactic standards. But he was alive and the Vorthak were not. "How many of you are there?" she asked. Colonel Nathan Hayes stood in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful Kaleri museum and studied the geological survey data on his tablet. 3 days of fighting had taught the humans valuable lessons about their enemy. The Vorthak were not just random destroyers. They had a plan, a purpose, and most importantly, a brain. "The whole infestation is connected," he explained to his assembled officers. "Every creature, every bioship, every piece of organic matter on this planet is part of one massive organism. And according to these scans, the central nervous system is located here." He pointed to a spot on the map that showed a depth of 2 miles beneath the planet's surface. The Kaleri call it the Deep Thermal Station. It was a geothermal power plant before the Vorthak turned it into their coordination center. Major Samantha White looked at the data with the eyes of a soldier who had spent her career doing impossible things. "Sir, that's 2 miles straight down through hostile territory. The access tunnels are completely filled with Vorthak biomatter. Even if we could fight our way through, how do we know destroying this thing will stop the invasion?" Hayes pulled up another screen showing brainwave patterns. Because Commander Zathara was a neurobiologist before she became a military officer, she's been studying the Vorthak communication patterns since they arrived. Every command, every coordinated attack, every tactical decision originates from this central node. Cut off the head and the body dies. The plan was insane by any reasonable military standard. A small team would have to fight their way down through 2 miles of the most hostile environment imaginable, plant enough explosives to destroy a facility the size of a city, and somehow get out alive. The Vorthak would throw everything they had at the assault team, but Nathan Hayes had spent 20 years in the Earth military, and he had learned that sometimes the insane plan was the only one that worked. "Major White will lead the assault team. I want volunteers only. Anyone who wants to sit this one out, no one will think less of you." Every single Marine in the briefing room raised their hand. The descent began at dawn on the fourth day of the battle. Major White led a team of 30 Marines and 10 Kaleri volunteers into the access tunnel that had once carried geothermal steam to the surface. Now it carried something much worse. The tunnel walls were covered with organic growth that pulsed like a heartbeat. Strange sounds echoed from the depths below, clicking, chittering, and something that might have been singing if it had not been so utterly alien. The air was thick with spores that would have killed an unprotected human in minutes. Private first. Class Kevin Martinez carried mining equipment that had been repurposed as weapons. His plasma torch could cut through almost anything, and his portable drill was powerful enough to punch through solid rock. He had volunteered for the mission because his brother had died fighting the Vorthok on Europa 3 years earlier. Movement. "Ahead," whispered Specialist Amanda Brooks from her position at point. She carried experimental sonic charges that could disrupt Vorthok communication and coordination. The charges had never been tested in combat, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The first contact came 50 meters into the tunnel. A Vorthok drone dropped from the ceiling like a spider the size of a small car. It moved with liquid grace until Amanda triggered her sonic weapon. The sound was beyond human hearing, but it hit the creature like a physical blow. It staggered and fell, giving Martinez time to hit it with his plasma torch. The smell of burning alien flesh filled the tunnel. It was not a pleasant smell. "Keep moving," ordered Major White. "They know we're here now." Above ground, the space battle raged with increasing desperation. Captain Stone's fleet had been fighting for 4 days straight. The USS Defiant was running on auxiliary power and had lost half its weapon systems. 3 ships had been destroyed completely, their crews adding their names to the long list of humans who died fighting impossible odds. But the fleet was not alone anymore. Word of the human intervention had spread through the galaxy faster than hyperspace communication. The first to arrive were 3 ships from the Kaleri colony worlds, their crews burning with shame that strangers had come to fight while they had hesitated. Then came a squadron of Altarian destroyers, their commanders finally shamed into action by human courage. "Sir, the USS Vengeance is reporting critical damage," Maya Rodriguez announced. "Captain Troy Johnson says they can't maintain orbit much longer." Stone looked at the tactical display. The Vengeance had been ramming Vorthok bioships for the past hour, using herself as a guided missile when her weapons failed. It was the kind of tactic that only humans would attempt. "Tell Johnson to get his people to the lifeboats," Stone ordered. "We'll pick them up after this is over." "Sir, Johnson says his crew refuses to abandon ship. They're requesting permission for one final ramming attack on the largest bioship in the formation." Stone felt pride and grief in equal measure. The crew of the Vengeance knew they were going to die, but they were determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. It was the most human thing imaginable. "Permission granted," he said quietly. "Tell them they die as heroes." 2 miles below the surface, Major White's team had fought their way through creatures that had no names in any human language. Things with too many legs and not enough skin. Monsters that breathed acid and bled liquid fire. Nightmares that existed only to kill and consume. Kevin Martinez had used most of his plasma torch fuel clearing organic blockages from the tunnel. Amanda Brooks had exhausted half her sonic charges, disrupting Vorthok swarms. Every member of the team was wounded, exhausted, and running low on ammunition, but they were close now. The thermal readings showed they were less than 100 meters from the central coordination node. The tunnel ahead glowed with an unhealthy light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their own heartbeats. "There," whispered one of the Kaleri volunteers, a young engineer named Kethvan. "I can feel it. The thing that commands all the others. It knows we are coming." The final chamber was a cathedral of living horror. The Vorthok had transformed the geothermal station into something that belonged in the deepest nightmares of every sentient species. Organic matter covered every surface, pulsing and writhing with alien purpose. And at the center, floating in a pool of luminescent fluid, was the brain. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. A structure the size of a small building, made of what looked like crystallized thought given physical form. Tendrils of neural tissue spread out from it like the roots of some impossible tree, connecting it to every Vorthic creature on the planet. "Sweet Mother of God," whispered Martinez. "How do we kill something like that?" Major White looked at the explosive charges her team had carried down from the surface. Enough high-yield warheads to level a city block. It would have to be enough. "We place the charges at the base of those neural connections," she ordered. "If we can sever the brain from the rest of the network, it should shut down the entire infestation." But the brain was not defenseless. As the humans moved into the chamber, creatures began emerging from the walls themselves. Not the mindless drones they had fought in the tunnels, but something different. Something that moved with intelligence and purpose. The battle in the chamber was unlike anything the humans had experienced before. They were fighting not just for their own lives, but for the survival of an entire species. Every shot had to count. Every explosive had to be placed perfectly. Amanda Brooks sacrificed herself to clear a path to the central neural cluster. She triggered all her remaining sonic charges at once, creating a disruption field that stunned every Vorthic creature in the chamber. The backlash from the sound waves killed her instantly, but it gave her teammates the opening they needed. Martinez used his drill to punch through the organic armor surrounding the brainstem. The creature screamed without sound, and every human in the chamber felt the psychic pressure of its pain. But Martinez kept drilling until he could place the largest explosive charge directly against the neural tissue. "Charges set," Major White reported on the COM channel. "All teams, get to minimum safe distance. We have 60 seconds. The timer counted down with mechanical precision as the surviving humans ran for their lives, through tunnels filled with creatures that were beginning to move erratically as their coordination failed. The explosion would either save Veltar Prime or entomb them all 2 miles underground, above their heads. The space battle reached its climax as the USS Vengeance made her final attack run against the largest Vorthic bioship. Captain Johnson and his crew sang the old Earth hymn, "Amazing Grace," as their ship accelerated toward the enemy at maximum speed. The collision sent shockwaves through space itself. When the light faded, both ships were gone, leaving only debris in the memory of human courage, and deep beneath the planet's surface, the timer reached 0. The explosion deep beneath Veltar Prime sent shockwaves through every living thing on the planet. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the coordination node that had controlled billions of Vorthic creatures simply ceased to exist. The blast vaporized 2 city blocks worth of organic matter and sent cracks through the planetary crust that would take centuries to heal. Major Samantha White felt the ground shake beneath her feet as she and the surviving members of her team ran through the access tunnels. Behind them, the chamber that had housed the Vorthic brain was collapsing in on itself. Ahead of them lay 2 miles of hostile territory and the slim hope of reaching the surface alive. "Move, move, move!" she shouted as chunks of rock and burning organic matter fell from the tunnel ceiling. Kevin Martinez was bleeding from a dozen wounds but still carried 2 injured Kaleri on his shoulders. The young engineer Kethvin had lost his left arm to a Vorthic claw but refused to slow down the team. But something had changed. The creatures that should have been swarming the tunnels were moving differently now. Instead of coordinated attacks, they stumbled and wandered. Without purpose, some fought each other. Others simply stood motionless as if waiting for orders that would never come. "The hive mind is broken," gasped Kethvin. "They do not know what to do without the central brain to guide them." Above ground, the change was even more dramatic. Across the entire planet, Vorthic creatures began to collapse as their nervous systems failed without central coordination. The organic matter that had covered the surface started to dissolve and decay. Acid rain stopped falling from the sky as the atmospheric processors shut down. Captain Alex Stone watched from the bridge of the USS, defiant as the Vorthic bioships in space began to drift without purpose. The massive creatures that had seemed unstoppable just minutes before, were now dying in the vacuum, their biological systems failing as they lost connection to the planetary brain. "Sir, we're getting reports from all ground teams," Maya Rodriguez announced with amazement in her voice. "The enemy resistance has collapsed completely. Our people are reporting that Vorthic creatures are just lying down and dying." Stone felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for 5 days. They had done it. Against all odds, despite losses that would have broken any other force, the humans had actually won. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "Begin search and rescue operations for survivors. And get me a status report on Major White's team." The rescue took 6 hours. White and 12 other humans emerged from the tunnels carrying 5 Kaleri survivors between them. They were exhausted, wounded, and covered in substances that would give xenobiologists nightmares for years to come. But they were alive, and they had saved a world. Commander Zathara stood in what remained of her capital city and watched human medics treating Kaleri civilians with the same care they gave their own wounded. The humans had lost almost a quarter of their ground forces in the 5-day battle. 3 ships had been destroyed completely. Hundreds of soldiers would never see Earth again, and yet they had stayed. They had fought when every other species in the galaxy had turned away. They had bled and died for people they had never met, on a world whose name most of them could not even pronounce. "Why?" she asked Colonel Hayes as he supervised the cleanup. "Operations. Why did your people come when no one else would?" Hayes looked up from his tablet where he was reading casualty reports. Each name on that list represented a family back on Earth that would grieve for someone who died fighting for strangers. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten." Zathara studied this human officer who spoke of impossible courage as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The galactic powers called you Deathworlders. They said your species was too primitive and violent to be trusted with advanced technology." "Maybe they were right," Hayes replied. "But sometimes primitive and violent is exactly what the situation calls for." The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than any hyperspace transmission. For the first time in galactic history, someone had not just fought the Vorthic but actually defeated them. The species that had terrorized civilized space for millennia had been broken by a force of 35,000 beings from a world that most powers had never heard of. The Altarian High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications. The Draconis Empire recalled its entire diplomatic corps to reassess their intelligence. Reports about this species called humanity. The Council of Ethereal Minds spent days debating what it meant that beings they had dismissed as barely sentient had accomplished what they could not. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Connor Blake received a formal communication from the Galactic Council. It was the first time in Earth's short contact with galactic civilization that the Council had initiated direct communication. "Admiral Blake," the message began, "the Council extends its gratitude for your species' intervention in the Veltar crisis. We formally request that Earth consider establishing diplomatic relations with the galactic community." Blake read the message 3 times before he fully understood what it meant. For centuries, Earth had been trying to gain recognition as an equal partner in galactic affairs. They had been dismissed as primitives, ignored as irrelevant, and patronized as children playing with weapons they did not understand. Now, suddenly, the galaxy wanted to talk. Blake's response was diplomatic but firm. "The people of Earth appreciate the Council's recognition. However, any diplomatic relations will be established on terms of mutual respect and equality. We will not accept a junior partnership or observer status. Earth has proven that our methods, while different from yours, are effective. We expect to be treated accordingly." The response sent shockwaves through the galactic diplomatic community. Species that had ruled star systems for millions of years were being told by newcomers that they would negotiate as equals or not at all. It was unprecedented, audacious, and completely in character for the humans. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the communications officer who had first received the Kaleri distress signal, found himself promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to Earth's new diplomatic corps. His first assignment was to help establish a joint human-Kaleri military base on Veltar Prime. "It's funny," he told his new partner, a Kaleri diplomat named Velthara. 3 weeks ago, nobody in the galaxy had heard of us. Now everybody wants to be our friend." Velthara looked at the human with the large, expressive eyes of her species. "They do not want to be your friends," she corrected. "They are afraid of you. Your people did something that the greatest military powers in the galaxy thought was impossible. You fought the Vorthak and won, and that scares them," Jake asked. "It terrifies them," Velthara replied. "For millions of years, the galactic community has solved its problems through diplomacy, trade agreements, and careful negotiation. Violence was something that happened to primitive species on frontier worlds. But your people proved that sometimes violence is the answer, and that makes everyone else very nervous." The joint base on Veltar Prime became a symbol of what could be accomplished when someone actually answered the call for help. Human and Kaleri engineers worked together to rebuild the cities that had been destroyed. Human medical teams shared their knowledge of combat medicine with Kaleri doctors. Kaleri scientists taught humans about technologies that could make their ships faster and their weapons more effective, but most importantly, the base served as a listening post for distress signals from across the galaxy. Captain Alex Stone, now promoted to Admiral, made sure that every communication was monitored around the clock. Because the galaxy had learned an important lesson from the Veltar crisis. When civilized species turned away from those in need, the Deathworlders would answer, 6 months after the battle. Stone received a message that made him smile. It was from the Altarian High Council, formally requesting human assistance with a Vorthak infestation in their outer colonies. The same species that had once dismissed humanity as too primitive to be worth noticing was now begging for help from the Deathworlders. "Sir," asked his aide, a young Kaleri officer named Kethven who had lost his arm in the deep strike, "how should we respond?" Stone looked out the window of his office at the rebuilt city below. Human and Kaleri children played together in parks, where Vorthak monsters had once hunted. The air was clean again, the water was pure, and life had returned to a world that had been dying. "Tell them we'll be happy to help," he said. "But this time they fight beside us instead of watching from a safe distance. And they follow human tactical doctrine, not their own." It was a new galaxy now, one where the species that had been ignored and dismissed had proven themselves to be exactly what everyone needed when the darkness came calling. The Deathworlders had answered one desperate plea for help, and in doing so, they had changed everything. Because sometimes the galaxy needs someone too stubborn to know when they are beaten,